Welcome back to the Carrot and Stick Podcast, a podcast series where we look to get under the skin of all things sales, performance, management and motivation to understand what makes our wonderful industry tick. Today, I'm sitting down with a little bit of a unique guest. Normally, we'll have recruitment leaders on this podcast, but today, I'm sitting down with Hishem Azzouz, the founder of Hector, a skills development platform, as well as the host of the Recruitment Mentors Podcast. Yes, it's very much like Inception, where we're getting two podcast hosts together, talk and waffle on for about an hour or so. What's really insightful about today's conversation is Hish has had a lot of experience talking to various recruitment leaders over the last few years. Every single week he's getting a top biller on or a top leader on to learn what has made them successful. So we have a talk through all the learnings that he's had from there, a little bit around skills development and what companies can do better in that area, but overall just sharing a lot of learnings that we've had from our podcast throughout 2024. This one is a really valuable one, so I won't waste any more time. Let's dive straight into it. Hishem Azzouz, founder of Hector. Hish, mate, we've known each other for years, and it feels really weird to say, let's let the podcast interviewer interview the podcast interviewer, but it feels like a really cool conversation to have because between us, mate, I'm pretty sure we know a hell of a lot of things based on all the episodes that we've done, right? How are you today?
Really good, thank you. Yeah, likewise, always fun to be on the other side and just try and be good at curating and sort of sharing the common things that I've been seeing. So always good fun to do that.
Class, mate. Well, let's start off with intros first. People listen to this. People have said to me, oh, who's Hishem? I'll be like, how do you not know who Hish is? It seems everyone in the industry seems to know who he is. But for those who don't know you, give us a quick 60-second intro. Who are you? What's your background? What are you up to these days? Let's hear it.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. So I do two things. I'm the host of my own podcast called the Recruitment Mentors Podcast. I've done that for nearly 7 years now. Started that when I was in recruitment. And every single week, religiously for 7 years, I've interviewed a top performing recruiter or a entrepreneur and really tried to sort of understand how they've achieved what they've achieved. So people can take those learnings and hopefully apply that to their own careers or their own businesses. As well as that, I'm the founder of a business called Hector, which is an online skills development platform where we have top performing recruiters deliver training, not recruitment trainers that last made a placement 5+ years ago. So really our big mission with that is, and also the podcast is, we really want to be able to create content, training, education that can help recruiters build and develop the skills that they need to dominate their market. That's what we're trying to do with Hector and the Recruitment Mentors Podcast.
Sam, mate, I love that. And also I can definitely vouch that you launch a pretty good rebranding party if ever anyone wants one organised by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that was good fun. Seems like ages ago, but yeah.
It was a long time ago, mate. Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun though. But that's all well and cool. Like I said at the start, I think what'd be really cool today to get into would be to dig into like the biggest learnings you've taken from this year. As you say, you're speaking to people every single week. You're hearing from the best and the brightest. No doubt, loads of lessons they've learned and things that you then take stock of and kind of like put back in the old noggin. That's your knowledge bank to build up and offer us advice moving forwards. So let's start there. What are the biggest things you feel that you've learned this year from your guests or just from being in the industry in general?
Yeah, so I want to start just by keeping it like super real. I think the thing that I'd start by sharing, and I've shared this with a few people, is that LinkedIn is not the truth. And what I mean by that is, like all social media, it is a bit of a highlight reel. And I was just telling you before we started this, last week I released an episode with a guy called John Gorhan, who ran a business for 22 years called Finley James. And in June 2022, they had their best ever month, £1 million month. It's a perm recruitment business. They had 70 salespeople, 50 in delivery, 20 in sales. And in September this year, 2024, they went out of business. They went into voluntary liquidation. So the reason why I'm sharing that is because I think the first thing, and I've experienced this in my own business, I was telling you, first time this year I've had customers sign contracts and then go out of business. I've never had that before. And the reality is, for a lot of people, it has been tough this year. So I want to start by saying that, really, because I do think that's an insight. Now, there's a lot that we can control as recruiters, but I think something that is just worth being mindful of is if you ever find yourself comparing how your business is doing or how you're performing compared to other recruitment businesses or other recruiters that you see, just take that with a pinch of salt, because oftentimes I've spoke to people that may on the outside look like they're doing really well, they're killing it, but then they're not.
Totally.
So I think that's just something worth sharing, because I think that's just helpful to know. And I think another data point there, which is interesting, is at Hector, we also serve this sort of solo founder community, and we've got 49 people in there at the moment, And sometimes what can be difficult when you're a solo founder is you've got nothing to compare what good looks like. So had a bunch of people in that community share like what they built this year. And the average that came out of that, and there's people, they've been doing it for ages, but most people sort of early on, maybe first year in business or in their first 3 years, the average billings there for people this year, all different markets, was around 125K. So I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of things out there to point to that people have had it tough. There's still plenty of people that would have won this year, that would have done great things. There's a lot that we can control. But I think let's first just sort of accept the fact that it's actually been pretty challenging, and that's okay. And the most important thing is, what have we learned from it?
Totally. It's so weird, and like this would be the danger now. You've got two hosts here who are very happy to talk for extended periods of time. We'll never finish. But no, I completely agree, because like I was saying to you before as well, like I feel like at the minute, every week or every other week, I get a nice big thick A4 letter through my letterbox, and it's one of our clients that have gone into administration. One of them, admittedly, probably 3 or 4 times. I'm not quite sure what you're doing there, guys, but fair enough. But it does happen a lot. And even during COVID, we didn't really experience that. We had people saying, we need to reduce our costs for a few months here while we figure out what the hell's going on. But businesses weren't shutting down at the rate that they are now. And I think even with things like the US election out the way and UK budget done and the new year about to roll around, and a few of our clients here on a podcast a couple of weeks ago or a webinar, they were saying November feels like January. It's been absolutely amazing for us. And then just a few days ago, a report comes out saying, November was the worst month in about 18 months for perm jobs based on stats off the back of the UK budget. So it's a really confusing picture, and where you've got some businesses really starting to do well and starting to hire again, you've still got those, I'd say, that are the longer tail of things that are still catching the flack and having bad markets or being in bad spaces where they're still having to let staff go, they're losing clients, and for some of them, sadly, still shutting down, right?
I think the bits to share, so I wanted to highlight that, but the bits to share that I think might be helpful here. So firstly, I think the companies that I've met, that again, I can only go off what they share with me. At the end of the day, like I don't look at their P&L. Do you know what I mean? Like I can't do that. So I can just go off what these people give me. Obviously, I sit down with people for an hour and a half. I think it'd be quite hard to sort of put up a facade for that long. When we're on my podcast, I really go into the detail on how they've done what they've done. But I think one of the common stories here is that the companies that have sort of thrived, I would say, are companies that have really committed to building a sales culture. I think the companies that have really struggled didn't sort of put a lot of energy into how can we really develop the skills of our team around the sales piece. I think there's a lot of companies out there that looked at their job flow, that looked at the amount of jobs and the amount of money they could make, and they just thought, let's just get bodies in to work on these jobs, and let's get delivery folk in. Let's just get bodies in to try and make more money. And then what ended up happening when the job flow started to really slow down is there's very few people within these offices and teams that can go out there and win more jobs, and people looking around and going, Derry, where are the jobs for me to work, right? So I think companies that really had a real focus on developing the sales-led culture, I think really had an edge, because they had a lot of people within their organization that they could rely on to bring on jobs, to open up doors when maybe accounts that have spent a lot of money with them over the last 2 years had stopped. So I think that's the first thing to share. I think that's a quite common thing that I've seen, and I've seen that in the Hector, like the most common skill gap that we're helping our customers close is the sales, is the business development piece. So I think that sort of played out. The other thing as well that's sort of worth mentioning here, we were just talking about it before, and I'm just going to be really honest here, and I'm a small business owner myself, but I do feel like we often hear this adage of like top billers don't make great managers. I think the other thing that's sort of also fair to say, for the most part I've seen, is top billers don't make great operators. And what I mean by that is, if you're a small business, a lot of the time, these people who are leading these small recruitment businesses are salespeople. So when it comes to, Derry, when should I hire? How much financial runway should I have? Should I hire this person now, or should I wait to pay this VAT bill? Like, they're not the sorts of things that are coming into my mind. I'm looking at the jobs that aren't being filled. I'm like, let's just fuck it. We'll worry about that. Let's just get Derry. Get Derry the recruiter in. So I think they're the two things that I think are worth mentioning here. The sales-led culture is something that I think has really sort of been, a light's been shined on that in terms of the lack of people being willing to sell or able to sell. And then also then this being a great operator, like you have to invest in getting better at that. Like I think a lot of people might have made some mistakes, took on debt, took on loans. They're not putting money aside to pay their tax bills. They're hiring people even though maybe they didn't have a solid financial runway, like all those sorts of bits. And sometimes you've got to learn the hard way on that. But I do think the longer you've been going and the larger you get, you can't just sort of what's the word? Not like risk it, but like just, oh, it'll be all right. Like you have to be a lot more calculated and strategic when there's a lot more overheads and there's more people. So they're the things that sort of come to mind for me that might be helpful for people listening.
Yeah, and I think I'd reflect. I mean, I think we've all heard the whole BD sales culture thing be spoken about to the death, and there's a few examples actually that both of things you just mentioned there. Like one of our team that joined us, and I won't mention them because it's not fair to, but when I was speaking to them on Friday, we were having some one-to-ones as I've taken over part of that business now to kind of like help build it up a little bit and understand that team better. And they said, I used to work in recruitment, and the reason that I left is because the sales side of things just wasn't for me. You give this person a big account to look after, they'll absolutely ace it. They'll source jobs like no one's business. It'll be great because they're really good at maintaining a relationship. But the new sales side of thing, doing cold business is not easy. It's really hard. And I think you have to be a certain kind of person to do it. And this person isn't like new to recruitment. They've done it for almost a decade at this point. But it's only really in the last 2 years or so where that requirement to be so on top of BD is now at the very forefront. And now it's a big focus of businesses saying, where the hell are the jobs coming from? Guys, go out there and cold call. And they're just like, I've never done it before, or I've not had to this level or this volume. And it is a completely different skill set. There is a reason why in software companies, there are SDRs and there are AEs and there are, say, customer success managers. Is the latter are fantastic at relationship building and looking after clients and making sure they're successful. The former, their job is new business. They can do with being told no 100 times a day. They can make do with cold calls. But for a lot of people, that's quite anxiety inducing to have to do it. So I completely agree. And there's that big skills gap at the minute, which I guess is where the plug for Hector comes in, right? It's where you guys can help level them up in that way. And then that second piece that you mentioned around top billers either setting up their own companies or people going to do it on their own and not realizing what they're getting into. What I have seen, both in terms of companies being set up, but also like recruitment MDs who have sold businesses or are starting up something else. One close friend of mine is doing this, is starting to provide all of that knowledge and that insight and even the service to let these top billers go and focus on the billing side of things and saying, look, you go and focus on that, and for whatever percentage of whatever you bill, we'll manage everything else. We'll deal with HR, we'll deal with finance. You just go and do what you're good at. And as things start to scale, we'll skill you up, and then you'll be in a spot where you can do all these things by yourself as well. Because the biggest trap I see is, like you said, people get into it without realizing just how much they need to do in terms of financial savviness they've got to do. It's not just a commission check you're worrying about anymore. It is cash flow, and probably even more scarily, the tax man who's waiting to know what you're earning as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think just a bit to add on the sales side that might be helpful for people just to make it tangible. I think the other thing that I often find is missing in recruitment teams, recruitment companies, is probably what you should most of the time find in software companies, because I always try and learn things from different industries. And that is a lot of the things that you can do as a business, as a manager, can really help on the sales side that often hasn't been done. Like if I said to your team, if you're listening to this and I came to your office and I said to your team, talk to me in detail what makes an ideal client in your market, in your desk. How confident are you that your team are going to be able to explain that to me in the detail that they need to? Not sure. A lot of companies I speak to, they're not massively confident in that. Then we have then we get into processes, right? If like there's a lot of companies out there, do you have a really detailed understanding of who your ideal client is and what problems that you solve for them, all of that. Then we get into like, how do you actually do sales? How do you actually do business development? Because the best recruiters have a repeatable system and approach that they follow. And again, a lot of companies that I speak with and we work with oftentimes don't have any of these things like documented or things that people can follow. It's sort of just expected for people to figure it out, listen to people around them, to know it. So this is the other thing as well. Again, this is, it's standard in like software sales, but if someone in your team said to you, hey, Derry, I've chased that lead, what does that mean? Are we like on the same page? Like what does that actually mean? Have we got an agreed process when someone in your team says, I've chased that lead or I've worked that target client this week? Like what does that actually mean? So I think there are things that businesses need to take responsibility for, can do, that's in their control, that can also help improve their team's ability to sell, to get in front of clients, and just have more of that consistency around bringing on clients. There are bits there that you can do rather than just sitting there going, wish my team would pick up the phone more. Like they're all scared of the phone. These are bits that you can do that a lot of teams that I find don't have because it's in the recruiter's head. It's just expected for people to figure it out. These are a lot of the things that you need to be thinking about. And even just to add one more, I just popped into my head. The other thing as well is like data and market mapping. Like there's a lot that you can do to make sure that your recruiters aren't trying to figure all this stuff out. Like you've given them the target client list, you've given them good data to go after. Like there's a lot that you can do now that can just be like, look, Derry, over to you. Like now you need to just be doing this versus these people spending a lot of time and you're paying them to like try and get hold of people and figure out who they should be speaking to and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. One thing I do want to dig back on that you said during that segment actually was at the very, very start around the ICP point. Because I can imagine the response that comes from some is like, it's all cool knowing exactly what an A-tier client looks like in this case. And they're the ones we want to work with. Everyone else tell to piss off, basically. At times when revenue is desperate, as it has been for so many over this last year, at what point do you think it's kind of okay to turn around and say, wherever the revenue comes from, it's good to come from for now, but we need to know we're going to fix that in the future? Is it always an advice on your, or is the advice on your side of what you hear from others is only work with the clients that you know are a good fit, or is sometimes money going to be money and you need it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I guess the advice I was giving there is, particularly on the sales side, is like you're going to always struggle if your team isn't clear on like who they can help the most and like who their target is and who they should be focused on as a starting point. Like you have to have that, otherwise it's like it's just so hard. Like who do I go after and these things. So I just think as a very minimum, you should make sure your team are equipped with that going into like next year, or like they need to have that if you want to improve the sales capability in your team. Yeah. Then I think, yeah, for sure. I think, look, when times are tough, obviously you have to make that decision. It can be quite specific, I find, on that. I think the most important thing is, do you understand what a great client looks like? And have we got clarity on that? Because if you haven't, you have to get there and work backwards from that. I think a lot of people don't have clarity on that, or at least they're not as focused on it as they should be. So of course you're going to have A jobs, you're going to have B jobs, you're going to have C jobs. That might be a way that you tier it. But then it comes down to like, where are you spending most of your time? Because if you are spending most of your time with shitty relationships, shitty clients, then it's going to be way more difficult. I think the thing that we need to think about here is, do we want to aim to have less deals, but they're more valuable and they're, with better relationships? Or do we want to try and get more deals that might be, we could get there, but it's going to be with shitty relationships, or it's going to be a lot more difficult, people that don't value our service. So I just think, I guess what I was trying to get across was, at the bare minimum, we need to have clarity on like, what does a great client for my desk, for my business, for my team looks like. If we don't have that, we really want to fix that, or at least be confident your team can describe that in detail. Yeah.
And I think also being able to pull back from that. If you're in a spot where you know what great looks like and you're kind of saying, well, here's a client that doesn't fit that perfectly, they've got some of these traits, but not all of them, then at least here's why they're not good for us. What I need to be mindful of is really important in that sense. Even just defining it, I do agree with you, by the way. I was more just trying to get the thoughts out of your head and see what you thought. I do agree with you. It's very much so worth defining. It doesn't mean say no to all of the revenue. Just acknowledge that you are saying yes to other revenue, and that in better times, when things are going well, when the staff are quite well resourced, they're very busy, those are the kind of clients that you have to be able to turn down at some point in the future as well, and say, this isn't worth us engaging with anymore, knowing that we'll get 10 jobs off you and close maybe one because you're engaging 5 or 10 other recruiters at the same time.
Well, it's just interesting what you just said, right? Like, if you don't do that first part that I've just said, you're not going to be confident saying no. That's the point. Like, great recruiters are very comfortable and confident to say no, because they know the people they say yes to are the people they know they can deliver a damn right great service to and do a good job. However, if you're not clear on that, you're always going to look at the opportunity and go, I could do a deal here. I might be able to work this and get someone over and make a placement. I could, right? There's a lot of potential missed out opportunities, but as we know, nothing is like, that's all potential. Like, none of that is guaranteed, right? So I think that's why it's even more important, because if you haven't got clarity on that, your team are not going to be confident saying no. That's the other point of it as well.
Yeah, completely with you on that front as well, 100%. So What are the lessons you've picked out from this year? What have think about maybe top 3 guests that you've had, for example? I know you said John last week was a really interesting one, given it was being very honest about the state of play and what's happened and reflections and all that kind of good stuff. What else would you say you've heard this year that's been really interesting or valuable?
Yeah, I guess other interesting insight to build on, I guess, the business development, the sales side that might be interesting to people. I'm always curious to find out what's working for people, essentially. So a couple of things to share here, because this has been a real common theme this year, I would say. So the sort of golden thread really is I found that a lot of recruiters who have had success this year or would share with me, like, this has been the one strategy that has enabled me to get the most out of my business development efforts. The golden thread has been it's doing stuff that isn't directly related to recruitment, basically. So what I mean by that is it could be you're sharing content consistently online, you're building your brand, and then you're leveraging that to start conversations. It could be that you've launched your own podcast and you're using that to start conversations. It could be that you have started a roundtable series, and once a quarter you're inviting CTOs in your industry to a roundtable event, etc. So the point here is that what recruiters have shared with me consistently this year is what really, like, it's hard to stand out, like it just is in recruitment. Like, it's so saturated. So having a different angle, a different way to engage Derry, the decision maker, has been really valuable for people. Because if I'm only able to speak to Derry when I have a candidate or when I see that he's hiring, it's just I can be put in that transactional, typical recruiter box so easily. But if I'm speaking to the same Derry, the decision maker, and I'm maybe initially trying to speak to him about a roundtable event I want to invite him to, or about the podcast that we recently started, or I want him to contribute to our newsletter, whatever, it enables me to cut through the noise and get more yeses. And a lot of the time, recruiters just need more yeses to be given an opportunity to show to people that they are different, they do care, they're sticking around, they want to do a good job, they want to give back to their industry. And that's something that's come up time and time again. It might look a bit different for each recruiter, but having those different ways that I can start conversations with people has sort of been a real golden thread with a lot of recruiters that I've met and interviewed this year.
Massively. I mean, I've played the same thing. Like, I imagine you're the same. You're on the receiving end of it as well as a business owner. You get a lot of recruiters reach out to you. You post a job, and suddenly your inbox is full of clients, of non-clients, of completely cold contacts, just being like, "Oh, I see you're hiring. Like, do you want to talk?" And for those that I don't know, I'm a little bit like, I spoke to dozens, mate, who I know personally. Like, sorry, but no. And where I've seen some really interesting ideas come about is one of our clients. I think it's the Develop Rec. They hire for IT and digital. They will invite people onto a podcast for engineering managers to get them to come and share their tips on how to be a good manager. What is it that you do that makes you good at your job? And therefore, it's not a conversation about, oh, are you hiring? Should you have a chat? It's more about, hey, we'd love to learn from you. Actually, do you want to come on our podcast? And that suddenly starts building a really good connection. Or the ones that I can think of, and I'm sure people have been offered this many times, but sometimes just someone saying to me, look, on this day, I'm in Birmingham, I'm grabbing a couple of coffees, do you fancy grabbing one at the end of the day or something like that? I'll get a beer, it's on me. Sometimes I'm just like, I'll go along and learn some things from this person as well. Or as you say, sometimes there can be breakfast roundtables of software founders being pulled together. It can be dinners that are being put on. There's so much that you can do. And we as a business are starting to explore next year, like doing more of these dinners. Like recently we sponsored the Camino Partners dinner, which was really successful. Had some great chat there as well, like really useful things we'd otherwise never get. Helping one of our deals move along the line as well. And it'll probably come to a close, which is great. We're hosting our own one in the new year, and there'll be a couple more next year that we're already starting to arrange and put on, because spending money on things like exhibitions, for us at least, it's good to be seen in the room, but it's much more about networking with partners or with clients, we find. Whereas things like dinners, where it's more intimate and you have a conversation, and it's not just really about like work and about trying to sell to someone, it's building a relationship. It just forms such a stronger connection. The next time you see someone, you're like really good friends because you spent 2 hours drinking and eating together, right? It's the kind of thing that you do with friends, is to sit down and have dinner. So although I wouldn't go as far as saying, of course, every recruiter should start thinking about putting on dinners and breakfast. That'd be very, very expensive. It can be a good way to start getting yourself into a given space or industry or even a city if you are finding yourself around there. And it hasn't got to be mega expensive. It can be a coffee morning if you want it to be. But I'm with you. I do think trying to find new ways of building these relationships and making yourself be seen as more than just a person that's going to go, oh, hey, do you want that job filling, is a really, really good way of being able to make yourself stand out.
Yeah, it's just approaching people in a different context. Like that.
Totally.
That's like, I've spoken to a lot of recruiters now, particularly with the podcast example, where they've always tried to get hold of Derry, the hiring manager, when it's with a recruitment context.
Yeah.
Had no luck. They reach out with the same Derry about coming on the podcast and them sharing their insights for other people to benefit in the industry, and they get cut through, and they get in front of them and they get a meeting. Then it is like this isn't going to always immediately result in like deals on the board, right? But then it's about doing it in a smart way. So the podcast piece, even the roundtables, these types of things, the best recruiters, that's at the core of their strategy. So they'll have their target client list, they'll have their dream client list, and their whole outreach is about the podcast, is about the roundtable events. Like, it gives you just a way to have different touch points with these people and start the conversation. But then if we were to get into the detail of it, what great recruiters will do, where this is central to their strategy, is you'll have a process where if we do a podcast together, that there's going to be lots of opportunity to build that rapport, build that connection, and really accelerate that relationship. So if I have a podcast and what the process might look like, it would be, we'd have a prep call. So that would be 30 minutes on the video, me and you get to know each other, prep call.
You're far more organised than I am. I just people on and go, "Oh, do you want to talk about today?" Then it's great.
Yeah, exactly. So so that would be my advice. But this is what recruiters will do, where it's like central to their BD strategy. It's like 30-minute prep call. Then we'll have an hour recording, even more FaceTime, going to get to know them. And then the real sort of golden nugget and actionable tip is then when the podcast goes live, you have a feedback call that week. And that's where, if you really wanted to, if there's things that you learn about that business, about that organization, if you really wanted to go, "Hey, Derry, look, I know throughout this process you've mentioned X. I actually think that's something that we can help with. This is why." You're going to have a lot of success, or at the very least, you want to make sure it's really clear on, "I'm Hishem, this is what I do, this is what I specialize in." You're going to have so many opportunities to do that. And throughout that period, you've really built some credibility, rapport with them, which you just wouldn't have been able to do if I'm just speaking about jobs and hiring and the typical stuff. So I think it's just having a different angle to do it. But I think the other part to share here, which we're talking about, I don't know how you feel about this. We were just sharing some like AI ideas before we started this, but it's sort of almost come like full circle. So something that I've been sharing with people recently is I've been asking marketeers, recruitment people in general, like, what are you doubling down on next year? Very interested on the marketing side. When I hear a VP of marketing, I want to ask them, like, what have you found you've got the best return on your marketing spend, and what are you doubling down on next year? And it sort of matches up with what you just said. It's face-to-face. It's these types of things, right? So I almost feel like we've not gone full circle, but in this like world of AI where I don't even have to write my emails, I don't even have to take my notes, like getting back to, or trying to use AI to facilitate this human connection is something that can give you an edge almost. And it's like, I've heard this a few times now, recruiters have shared with me where they've gone out and met a client and they've asked them, "How many recruiters have you met with this year?" And the answer is none. So again, thinking ahead next year is like, even looking back at this year, your biggest spenders, have you met them? Because if you haven't, you should.
Yeah.
So I think this is the other part of it. Again, we're talking about different ways to start conversations, but again, next year, what's your strategy to get in front of people and meet people and trying to facilitate that human connection? And I think in today's world, it's going to be appreciated even more, and it's going to go even further. But also, if you get in front of a client, you get in front of your candidates, you can really get across what you're about and your passion and what you want to do in the market that you're focusing on. So I think that's also got to be part of your strategy next year if you want to win or get more out of what you're putting in.
You talk about AI a bit there, and it's kind of had a bit on the side of that. And a thought to also put a prompt as well is AI means everyone is emailing everyone, LinkedIn DMing everyone all the time, but it's not a human doing it. I don't think I've probably responded to a cold email in about 18 months now, because I just get bombarded with crap all day. And I know it's not the person writing it. They can try and customize and go, "Oh, I see you from this place and you went to this university." And it's like, yeah, cool, well done. You've got someone that can scrape my LinkedIn profile. There's no real value being added there. And so I'm totally with you in saying, if you can make it more human, that's great. You know what worries me more than anything right now? I don't like cold voice notes. People don't even send like a message to say hello. They'll just send me a 2-minute voice note. And I'm like, I'm not being funny, mate, but I'm not going to sit here for 2 minutes and listen to a voice note from someone I've never ever spoken to. And they'll send a follow-up 3 days later that again is a voice note. And I'm just like, this is a wind-up. The worst thing about it is probably in the very near future, voice notes are going to be AI generated as well. Like, my marketing team have taken all the podcasts off this platform that we used to record it on, and they can have me saying whatever the hell they want. It is ridiculous. And I'm just like, it doesn't 100% sound like me, but someone who doesn't know me super well won't pick up on the intonations in my voice and things that I might normally say, or how fast I might normally speak compared to how the AI might, things like that. But more than anything, in a world where everything is becoming so high volume, incredibly transactional, quite cold, I'm with you. It's where the human experience is now probably stronger than ever before.
That's what I mean. So that's why I think,
if someone wants to invite me to a golf day, then I'm all ears for a golf day.
Yeah, I'm all ears on that, mate. I know
honestly,
we spoke about it, didn't we? It changed.
I'll tell you what, it'd be the way to my heart. No one ever seems to do this so far. It's like I've spoken a few times on LinkedIn. I've started playing golf recently. I'm absolutely in love, dying to get on the course. Not a single invite. I'm so disappointed.
I've got an interesting insight for you on that, right? And again, this sort of goes into what we're talking about here. Met up with a friend to go to like a live podcast event who works for who's like an MD of a tech recruitment business. And we're just talking about work and different things. And he hosted a golf day. He was telling me how the bill just got larger and larger. But what he shared was how there's people that they invited to that golf day where, one, they've got like 3 to 5x return on that already in terms of what they put in terms of like deals and things that have happened. Nice. But he said since that golf day, there's certain people that they've always struggled to like just get that connection, get that relationship going. And by inviting them to that, having that day, it's just completely accelerated. Like if they call this person, they answer, they're motivated to help them out. So again, it's like it can accelerate this stuff as well. Like getting people in a room. And I've seen this myself this year where it's the first time we've held founder dinners. And like, there's people that you've always connected, engaged with online. You meet them for dinner, and again, it can really accelerate things.
Yeah.
So again, that was like a real life example from a recruitment business that put on a golf day, and he just told me there was a number of examples where there's certain people there, prospects, that they've just always found it hard. They invited them to a golf day, they had that day, and then now the sort of doors have been completely opened. So you've got, so it's interesting. So we're not saying anti-AI stuff here by any means, but I do think it's always about those edges, right? And about how can we stand out? How can we differentiate ourselves? Everyone at some point, if they have the money, is going to have a solid tech stack and solid tools that they can leverage, right? But again, it is about how can we be spending time doing the stuff that matters, and that is building relationships, getting in front of people, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we've got to be thinking about that, and that's got to be central to your strategy next year for sure.
You know what really gets me? I've been doing this now for 10 years. So we had our 10th birthday as a business was last month, for example. So it's been out a good while now. One thing that still really baffles me is people separate in their heads so clearly like work from personal life. Yeah, to come back to your example about like the golf day, for example, how it's warmed things up an awful lot for them. People are more willing to speak to them. They connect to people they otherwise wouldn't. Think about in your personal life, if a mate asked to borrow money from you, for example, and this is a mate that you very rarely spoke to, would cancel plans on you last minute, would let you down quite a lot. You don't really want to help that person, let alone probably really speak to them very much. Whereas if it's someone that's always going out of the way to check on you, popping in for a coffee every now and then, you're going for a beer with them and all that, and they're buying you drinks here, there, and everywhere, you'll have no problem probably lending them a little bit of money or doing something to help them out. And it's really not that different in business, I don't think. Like if you think about relationships that you have, as the old saying, if people buy from people and they don't buy from businesses, is very much that. If they feel that they can trust you and they know that you've got their back and you're not just there to try and screw them over or just try and swindle some money out of the pockets and then disappear into the ether, they're far more likely to engage with you. And I think the golf day example is exactly that. It's you extending an olive branch and saying, hey, look, here's the way that we're trying to open things up here. We don't want to make it about business. We're not asking for your money. Just come along and have a good time, network with some peers as well. It'd be cool to see you there. And it is so much more human and personal than if it was just purely a business transaction. And it just baffles me that people struggle to kind of sit down sometimes and just think, if I was a human being, which you are, and this is like a personal friend or someone outside of work that was trying to get my attention or make friends with me, for example, how would they go about doing it? Just put yourself in those kind of shoes and think about it a little bit more than being a purely business transaction, because humans are still human and they'll still respond to the same things.
Yeah, no, totally. And I do think what sometimes recruiters overlook or underestimate is that if we take the the sort of CTO example, the tech example, I think sometimes what recruiters forget is the number of CTOs that you will speak to. If you've built some traction, you've built networks, you should be speaking to a good amount of CTOs every week or every month, right? But how many CTOs speak to other CTOs? That's the value that you can really offer as recruiters, because you can make those connections, you can share that information, and the best recruiters do that. And by inviting these people to dinners, to golf days, you're creating an environment to accelerate that, because these CTOs, these people don't speak to as many people that do what they do. Like it is quite rare. Like unless you're someone that loves networking, you have to go out of your way to sort of make it happen, right? If you wanted to meet other CEOs of SaaS companies, you have to go out of your way to do that, right? So if I'm as a recruiter, I can make that easier and I can make connections for these people where I think it could be really beneficial. That's a really another way, like such a great value add as well that you can offer, that I think sometimes recruiters underestimate. You just have to facilitate. You have to be the connector, and that's one of the best ways that you can leverage your network and what you can do and how you can really get some good faith with people, and how you can give in a really positive way.
And I think, again, without being in the shoes of that person, like, it's hard to think, oh, cool, what's that connection there for? But again, I think about if you pause and look at yourself, for example, like who does a recruitment consultant want to learn from? They want to learn from a consultant that's doing really well. Or who does a recruitment leader want to learn from? Oh, other leaders that are doing really well, those that are a couple of steps ahead of where they're going to be, so they can talk them through the kind of things that you might get stuck on, or the pitfalls that you might find as you grow, or things to help you move that little bit faster. Everyone's a nosy bugger. Everyone wants to learn from people that are like them or have walked the path they're about to go down. And I'm totally with you. If you can be the facilitator for those intros, why not make it happen?
Exactly, yeah. And I think sometimes that's just a bit missed. Like that is such a great value add that you can bring to the table, which is why dinners work, which is why I've always been a huge advocate of recruiters sharing content. Like you can be a broker of information, a broker of insights. Like you're always going to be that. If you're niche down, you're focused, you're going to speak to way more people that do what they do than those people that you work with. And like that's one of the best things that you can do, bringing those people together. It is one of the best value adds that you can bring to the table.
Yeah, pretty agree. So I'm very mindful of time, by the way. I've only got about 15 minutes before I've got to jump onto the meeting. So we'll get onto the second topic I wanted to ask you about, which is more specific to what you do with Hector in this case, around skills development. Now, we had a chat at the start about the difference of training versus skills development and the terms that are used in this sense. You're very, very clear on saying skills development is what Hector does. Okay. How do you summarize that as being something different to training?
Yeah, good question. I'll be honest, part of the training and skills thing is because the reality of it is I'm working with Jeremy Snell on like a report, and hopefully each year this will be something that we can do together. But we're sort of, you'll know this, we got inspiration from the coaching business that I know you've invested in. So they did a report on the state of like coaching, right? So we're working together on creating like a report on like the state of professional development and recruitment. And what's like really clear, and we had about 400 people complete it, so a fairly good amount sample size, but hopefully next year it will be larger, is the perception of training is like really poor. I think the stat that we pulled out already is that 14% of recruiters that completed that feel like training has had a positive impact, or believes it can have a positive impact on their performance, right?
It's awful.
Yeah, which is awful, right? But then what's also interesting is, which is why we're doing what we're doing, is 50% of people that aren't hitting target aren't getting any training. Right?
Which is also scary, right?
Yeah, so I guess if I'm honest, part of the training and skills piece is just because like I'm very aware, because I've experienced it, like there's so many people that have had poor experiences of training. So a lot of the time when I'm speaking to companies about Hector, there is already like the challenge I have sometimes is just that perception of like we've had training before, it's been irrelevant, it hasn't been engaging, whatever. Like that is part of it. So that's one element to it. And then I think the other element to it is I just think skills are just way more tangible. Because I don't know what you think when you hear the word training, but like what sort of comes to me is maybe someone comes to the office, we have like a bit of a session, and then they leave.
And that's it. Done.
And that's it. Do you know what I mean? It's not like an ongoing thing. And I think skills, when you really break it down, like I just love this idea of skill building and like being aware of like, right, I know right now that the skills that I currently do have aren't where they need to be to get me to where I want to be. So what are the skills that I need to keep refining, keep developing that's going to help me get to where I want to get to? So I think it's just a lot more tangible. And I like this idea of skills also being something that the individual can control. Like if I'm aware of the skill gaps that I have, I can control how I'm developing those skills. It's one of the very few things that you can control in recruitment, like how good I am and the skills that I've developed. So I think I'm trying to, like deal with that perception. I'm trying to really make it more tangible for companies that we partner with and get them to think about their team skills. Are there skill gaps? Are there not? And once we understand that together, then we can be a lot more bespoke with the training, with the education, because we can then target at the skills that they need to develop or they need to build. So that's sort of my answer to that, really. Like it's, as you can tell, I'm still sort of refining it, but I do really like this idea of just recruiters being aware of the skills that they know they need to develop further. Like just, I like that. I think it makes it more tangible versus like, Derry's struggling with this, maybe let's get him some training. I don't know. It just, yeah.
Very much the same experience of training, by the way. It is a come in for 2 hours and sure, they might have a really well-rehearsed 2-hour segment they give you. Everyone feels amazing afterwards. Oh yeah, loads of ideas. The next day, everyone's forgot about them, right? That follow-up is what often is missing. So the reinforcement of the skills that you're learning, I think, is a really big part. And to come back to this as a starting point as well, maybe someone's listened to this and they're not quite fully ready yet to invest in a platform like Hector, and they're just thinking, cool, where should I get started with this? What are the 3 biggest mistakes maybe that someone would make at the very start? What advice would you give to someone to say, here's how you can get started with this today and start seeing an impact in your business?
Yeah, cool. So couple of things here then. So the first thing is, if you want to get more out of your team, then do the things that we said earlier, where you've documented the important parts of your business. So that's like, you should have somewhere documented what your ideal client is. You should have somewhere documented what your sales process is. Like, really start there, because they're all assets. This is what I always say to recruitment founders who are like small and growing. Like, if there's stuff in your head on how you do what you do, it needs to get out of your head. This is why a lot of companies struggle to grow, or they yo-yo, because you're repeating yourself. You haven't got these assets that you can build where you can go, Derry, check that document again that we went over in onboarding. Like, you can check it out there rather than it being in my head and I have to give you the answer.
I've always heard if you say something twice, write it down. Even if it's bullet points to begin with, and it's not a fully fleshed out, formal looking document, who cares? Just get the bullet points down. Yeah,
so I'm big on systems and process. So I think that is the best place to start, because if you, and I use the word assets intentionally because these are things that I think it's a really high leverage task to build systems. Yes, you might think it's going to take so much time, but these are things that once they're created, you can use over and over again.
Exactly.
Like that's the best thing about it. So I'd very start as a minimum. Basically, I would do the following things. One, if you haven't already, obviously we're recording this towards the end of a year. So if you haven't already, make sure you understand your client data. Who has spent the most money with you this year? Like, look backwards, look at your client data. That's the perfect place to start. Look over the last 2 years, last year, what clients have spent the most money with you? Why? What do they have in common? Was it who was the decision maker that you spoke with there? Then start getting into the detail of it. How did we acquire this client? Was it through a candidate spec? Was it through a referral? Like, let's really build a picture of the clients that we do our best work with. Let's start there. Once you've got that, then let's be really clear on what is our ideal target client. What is our dream client? Let's really build that out. What are their biggest challenges? Who's normally bought into involved in the buying process? All those things. Then we want to get to get some really simple business development processes. There'll be some really common trigger points that leads to your team doing business development. It might be a live vacancy. It might be a new senior leader just been appointed. It might be they just received funding. Whatever the common triggers are, let's make sure we've at least got a version 1 process of when your team members say, hey, Derry, you know that client that we just saw that's raised money, I've chased that, and we're in agreement on what that looks like. So that just needs to be over whatever, it needs to have quantity of days that you're working on it. It needs to be multi-touch. So, you know, what we're doing on day 1, is it a call? Is it an email? Is it both? Like, we just need that documented. So then people can follow it. And then the final thing as a very minimum would then just be having a clearly documented sales process. So what does that look like? Do we want to book initial calls, discovery calls, whatever you want to call them? and then we do a pitch. Like, let's just be really clear on like what we want your team to do. We want them to book meetings, but what's the process that we take our prospects on for them to become buying customers? So we want that documented, like at least version 1. We want those things documented. That will have a big impact. Then I think the other things that we can do is be a lot more intentional about the knowledge sharing within your businesses, within your teams. So sometimes we can be really overly reliant on Derry having the courage to ask for help. So rather than relying on Derry that we feel like if he needed something that he'll come to us, instead decide on a cadence that works for you. It could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly, it could be monthly, but make sure you've got intentional space with your team to share what's working and share what's not working. So it could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly. And the whole point of that space is you get together with your team and you talk through what's working. Derry, I've got this subject line that I keep using at the moment and it's got an unreal open rate, or I'm really finding candidate specs work at the moment and this is what I've changed about them. Like, let's create intentional space for people to share what's working. You'd be surprised how many people look at the top biller in their office and they have no idea how they're doing what they're doing. Right? So be intentional about it. And then the final point would be, if you do invest in anything in terms of any extra time, do make it what we said earlier, like try and make it more one-on-one coaching. That is what we found people are going to value the most, obviously, because it's more personal. What's absolutely wild to me is the amount of companies that don't have like a phone calling system or use a VoIP system. So like if you're listening to this and you're still relying on your entire team using their mobile, like change it. Like just because you want to protect that data at the very least, just number one. 2, you're missing huge amounts of coaching opportunity. Like if your team are making calls and they like to make calls and go into the corridor so no one can hear, you have no idea what they're saying. Like even if they're doing really well, like we don't know what they're saying in the corridor that's resulting in them being the top biller. Like, we want to get that information. So at the very least, have a product in there that you can record the conversations and we can listen back and we can do that call coaching. That is one of the best ways that you can help your team in terms of looking at their calls, dissecting them, giving them one thing to improve on the call next time. Like, make it really personal. But if you want something entirely free and you want to level up, then definitely listen to the podcast. Like that is crazy amount of value that we're giving there. But there are hopefully some really tangible things that you can do, bar the phone system one, that don't require any money, just require time.
Yeah. And the phone system one, I'll say, like, these days phone systems are getting so good that you can like ask AI, like, how many times was this mentioned on the phone call, for example. So on how many calls did Hish mention our terms of business? And if it'll tell you, I was mentioned on 3 out of 10 calls, it's like, okay, why weren't they mentioned on those 7? And it can give you answers to that as well and suggestions as to why these things are happening. Being able to put, like, the old school way of like having to go through each call one at a time to understand what's happening was horrible. But these days, being able to analyze loads and loads of phone calls all at once and pick out the key trends, incredible for coaching. Like, there are loads of tools that you can upload recordings to for free to do that for you as well. Like, there are genuinely so many things out there. But as you say, the number of people that are still using mobiles baffles me at the best of times as well.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely nuts. Cool. No other major questions for now. Then, like I said, I need to wrap it up in a minute as well, mate. But that was, again, really, I knew it would be like sitting down and talking to you, because you speak to so many recruitment leaders. It'd always be a lot of insight. And actually getting 2 hosts together means we could talk forever back and forth about these issues. No doubt going on for another hour or 2 if we wanted to. If we do want to get in touch or follow the podcast, where should they go?
Best place, LinkedIn, Hishem Azzouz, podcast on all the normal platforms, Recruitment Mentors Podcast on YouTube as well, if you like to watch things. But I guess I would just end on, I'm sure you saw this, Derry, but there wasn't like a data source, but that post that went around saying that like 32% of recruiters like left the industry this year, or like there's 32% less recruiters or something like that. I just think, I know we started the start of this conversation about saying that it's been tough, but trust me, like part of this game is still being here in like 2 years' time and doing what you're doing your best work. So I guess all I would say is there's a lot that you can control. There's a lot that you can focus on that can help you, really get to the performance levels that you want to. But I think the cool thing about what will hopefully happen over the next few years is great recruiters are just going to rise to the top, that deliver a great service. And I'm just a huge advocate of our industry. Like, I just think our industry needs to get way more respect than it gets. And I think part of that is just people need to keep striving to be better, delivering the best service they can, and the rest will take care of itself. But there's plenty of opportunity out there. A a lot of people just describe the market as just a solid, hard, challenging market, but you can have a lot of success in it. But I think a lot of people might say it's going to weed out a lot of the crap.
A lot of the mediocre, I was going to say.
A lot of the mediocre. So like, I don't view like next year or initially in a negative way at all. Like there's always going to be opportunity. Like take what you do seriously, be passionate about it. Like you should be really confident in what you're delivering to people. Like you solve one of the biggest problems for so many companies, and that is people. It is always hard. Like getting the right people in the right seats makes or break a company. So really believe in your service, commit to getting better, and trust me, whatever timeline it takes, you're going to achieve your goals and hope you have a lot of fun in the process.
Mate, that's the soundbite I need to take away and put some nice inspiring music behind it and throw it on LinkedIn, mate, and I'll get loads of likes down at your face on there. Wonderful. Now, look, mate, I really appreciate it. It's been a great hour of chatting as well. I'm sure we'll do it again at some point as well, and we'll catch up for that beer at some point as well.
Sounds good.
Wicked. Thank you, mate.